Now we're back to the health segment, and Dr. Kelvin was helping us to breaking it down for us. What are sprains and strains? So let's continue.
Yeah, so I was just giving the architecture of the joints.
Yeah.
So when at the joints, you have muscle connecting to bone.
Yeah.
And the thing that connects the muscle to the bone is called a tendon.
A tendon, okay.
Tendon, and it's a fibrous tissue. Then we have the thing that connects bone to bone, keeps the bone in place. You know, the two, because the joints, I mean, two different bones are coming together, so something must hold them in place so that they don't slip or fall apart. And that thing that holds bone to bone is called a ligament.
Okay.
Also a fibrous tissue.
Okay.
But different structure from the tendon.
Okay.
So we have two different fibrous tissues in this area. Now, a sprain is when the ligament, I mean the one that connects bone to bone, is injured. It can either by stretching or by tearing. Then you have a sprain. So that's quite deep. It's deep in the joints.
Okay.
You know. Then a strain is when a tendon, which is what connects muscle to bone, is injured. So the same thing, either by stretching or by tearing.
Okay.
So that's basically what the difference is between a sprain and a strain.
So a sprain, if I get it right, a strain is the tearing
or stretching
of the muscle
of a tendon.
Of the tendon.
Yes.
Okay, so the tendon is the one that's being impacted.
Exactly.
In a strain.
And the tendon is what connects the muscle to the bone. So you know, basically, when your muscle is what causes the bone to move. So when you move your leg, obviously it's your
muscle that's contracting.
And the thing that is so when the muscle contracts, is the tendon that will actually then move the bone.
Okay.
You know, and so that is basically what is going on. So a strain would be an injury to that tendon that is supposed to cause the bone to actually do the movement. You know, I told you it's a bit confusing.
And then the sprain
is when a ligament, and the ligament is what connects bone to bone. It holds the bone in place at the joints so that it doesn't shift or it doesn't fall apart. It keeps them stable so that you can perform all your activities, you know, as normally you normally would do.
Okay. Now, what typically would cause you to, if you're walking normally, you're doing your things normally, and you've not had any challenges, what is it that will now cause you to have either a sprain or a strain?
Well, there are risk factors, but let me start off by saying that everybody has experienced one or the other at some point. I mean, when you were a kid, you were playing around, aggressive play, you bump into somebody playing football, you know, doing police and thief or something, you know, you'd fall down and
fun
then
games.
Yeah, those were fun times. I wish I could get involved again. You know, as an adult, I mean, you probably were going down a staircase or going up a staircase, you miss a step, you bump your leg, you bump your knee, you fall down, you know. So accidents basically can cause you to sprain or strain any joints. Commonly it happens in the ankles, the knees, it could happen in the toes, you know, elbow, you know, so any joint is at risk, really, you know. But there are particular activities or there are particular people who are at risk of developing sprains or strains. And number one on the list is people who are out of shape.
Oh, wow.
Yes, so if you are out of shape, you are more at risk of developing these things.
Okay, so let's break it down. When you say out of shape, what do you mean?
So, out of shape meaning that you are not active. You are leading a passive life. You hardly exercise. You hardly do any physical activity. You don't exert yourself. You know, so basically your joints and your muscles are not used to any form of physical activity or any sustained physical activity. So let's say, for instance, you decide that it's a new year. One of your New Year resolutions is to probably start becoming a bit more active. So you decide that you're going to, you know, climb up the stairs instead of using the elevator.
Yeah.
It's a new activity, and your body is not used to it. So you are more likely to injure something.
Okay.
You know, because the muscles, there's something called muscle memory.
Okay.
They kind of remember things that you do more often. In fact, typically, I mean, and it happens to everybody, even though it's not a good thing. If you are driving, from home to work, it gets to a point where you actually ask yourself, how did I get home? I don't remember making this turn.
Okay.
You know, because your muscles and they sort of go into autopilot.
Okay.
You know, so it's the same thing with your body. If you do something more often, they are less likely to less likely to get injured from that same thing.
Yeah.
You know, and so if you don't go to the gym often and you say you go to the gym today and you don't take your time, you don't pace yourself, you just go in there and start lifting heavy weight, you could develop a tear somewhere. It could be a ligament, which then becomes a sprain, or a tendon, which then becomes a strain.
Yeah.
You see, and so it's very important that you take things in your stride, gradual. And one of the most important things that you can do to actually slow or prevent or reduce the occurrence of these things is warm up.
Okay.
And I'm sure everybody every time you go for an exercise session, they tell you warm up is very, very important.
Yeah.
It's because of some of these things. Because as you warm up, and as the name suggests, warm up, you sort of prep the joints that I'm going to put some pressure on you. So,
Get
start
ready.
stretching out. Yes.
Okay.
Start bringing your reserves, and then let's get this done. But if you just get up and start jogging, no, you might end up injuring yourself.
Okay.
You should do the stretches to make sure that your ankles and knees are ready for the exertion you're going to put on them. Don't just get up from bed, wear your boots and start jogging. No, it doesn't work like that. You end up injuring yourself. Even if you don't fall, you will develop problems because the tendons and ligaments were too stiff and we're not ready for the stretching of jogging.
Okay. Now, this conversation that we are having, a lot of people will be very interested. Of course, there are a lot of, should I say, lateral conversations around this. Yeah. So for example, muscle pull. What's a muscle pull? I mean, we hear the term so often. I'm not even sure if we understand, if we understand what it actually means and what it is technically. So if you're watching and you would like to ask a question for Dr. Kelvin to answer, 0550-585832. If you happen to be outside Ghana, kindly use +233 to prefix that number for us to know what you're thinking and any questions that you have. Yes.
So there are so many different types of muscle injuries or muscular injuries. I mean, muscle pull by itself, as in the English terminology, is not really medical.
Okay.
Let's say, and typically, let's say you are going to do some exercise, and most of the time we have these things when you are doing sustained exercises. So like jogging, like playing football or swimming.
Okay.
Because the body is not used to that much exertion over that long period of time, and so as you begin to stress the body, any part of the muscle can get injured. What we were discussing earlier, the sprains and the strains, is related to the joints because the tendons and the ligaments are in the joints. But let's say there's a muscle, what's it called, a stretching of the muscle somewhere at a distance away from the joint. That could be interpreted as a muscle pull, even though medically it could be, as I already said, a stretched muscle, could have been a small tear, and most of these things will resolve by themselves, may not need any
medical intervention.
Exactly. But that term muscle pull itself, because it's used in everyday language, it can mean so many things. Some people may even call this strain and sprain, they can call it muscle pull because they are none the wiser. And there's this other one that they call stitch. And usually happens when you eat and you go and exercise after eating, you get some sharp pain in your abdomen. I mean, it's the same thing. It's all, so there are so many different types of muscular injuries that you'd need time to actually understand all of them. But the good thing is that most of them are self-limiting.
Okay.
And so even without having to go to hospital, they sort of resolve by themselves if you follow the protocol. And there's a nice terminology, we call it RICE.
RICE.
Yes. So let's say you have an injury around the ankle, and provided it's not a serious injury, this is reserved for just what's it called, basic injury that you don't need admission. You can actually sit at home and treat it yourself. R represents rest. So just rest that limb. And so if you got an injury in your left knee, obviously reduce how much walking you are doing because it needs time to sort of heal. So you're not going to continue jogging if you have pain in that knee. You're not going to continue climbing upstairs if there is pain in that knee. So rest that limb. Then I for ice. So put some ice on it because ice would reduce the pain and then also helps reduce the swelling. So ice that joint. Then C for compression. So put some bandage on it. But here I must sound a note of caution. Some people make the bandage too tight. It's not going to be. It's not the tightness that makes that much of a difference. So it doesn't have to be tight, especially if it's a child. You see, if you're an adult and you put on a bandage and it's too tight, as time goes on, you feel pain below the bandage. So let's say you put a bandage around your knee, you have pain around the knee. That's expected. But then below the knee, you start getting pain. So in the calf, in your legs, when you start noticing that, obviously it tells you that the bandage is too tight. But if you did that for a child, and the child is not able to express themselves well enough, you could end up causing problems because by tightening the bandage,
you're restricting blood flow.
Exactly, you have blocked circulation. So you could have, I mean, it might just have been a small sprain, and I end up with what's it called, loss of sensation, loss of pulses in the foot, and that's a major problem. So don't make it too tight, you know. And then E is for elevation. So once you have a situation where there's pain and swelling, lifting the leg, putting the leg on the pillow. When you lie flat, put the leg on the pillow. It helps with reducing pain. If you are sitting, put it on the stool. You know, straight on the stool. It helps reduce the pain and also the swelling. And so, just these 4 basic principles would help. Most of these muscle injuries, in fact, the sprain and the strain, unless you are an athlete or you are heavily dependent on that joint, there's really no need to differentiate them. You know, but if you are an athlete, say a footballer, and then you have a ligament injury, obviously, because you depend on your leg for your economic activities, we cannot just leave it. So they may have to do further testing to find out exactly where the injury is. So if there's a need to go and do surgery to close it, then it's done. But for most of the general population, if it's not a severe injury, there's no need to even differentiate between a sprain and a strain. It's just an injury, and the treatment is about the same for both of them. Okay,
so rest, ice. So ice it.
Put some ice on it.
Why not heat?
Well, ice is a better. It gives better results than heat. You see, heat sort of causes. I mean, this is a bit technical. Vasodilation, which means that to bring in more blood, and then there'll be more swelling. So you want to sort of reduce the swelling. Exactly. So ice is a better option in this regard. Heat has its own use elsewhere.
Rest, ice, compression, and elevation.
Very simple to remember, rice.
Rice. So just quickly, let's do a couple of questions people that have come. Good morning, please, Doc. How can I treat ankle strain at home?
Well, I think that's what we just answered with the rice. You see, but if it's something that is, because sometimes it can become chronic, you know, which means that probably the first one was a bit more severe than people, whoever you or maybe the medical personnel thought it was, and so it was not treated properly. You know, I mentioned that this treatment is for very simple, you know, home remedies for sprains and strains. You know, but if it's a bit more severe, like if it's a tear, obviously it has to be put together. You know, so if you left it, it could become chronic. So you have pain in your ankle for years. You know, it has to be treated. So you need to go into hospital. They probably do an X-ray, MRI, and then find the cause of the pain, and then the appropriate treatment will be carried out for you.
So Kweku from Osu is asking this question. It's not related, but maybe you can give him a quick answer. Please, Doc, I have been having stomach pain. I'm also not stooling. It's very painful anytime I finish eating. He says, I really struggled at night, but this is not the first time. It happened to me some years back and it stopped, but it's recently starting to surface again. What could it be?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind would be an ulcer, a peptic ulcer. And so he needs to go and have a checkup, and then the appropriate treatment could be started if indeed it is confirmed that it's an ulcer. But just from what he has said, that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Sounds like an ulcer. And then a final question here. Please, when I sit for over 30 minutes, I feel some severe pain in my thighs. This is Daniel from Tema. He says, I am just a child and it goes when I stand. I'm not sure what he means by that. He says,
I mean, well, definitely there needs to be more information from that. From Charles, because maybe there's a pain start from the back and radiates and shoots into the thighs. In which case, then we are suspecting a problem with the spinal canal or something. You know, but ultimately he needs to have a checkup so that we will know the appropriate thing. But let me just chip in that you should try as much as possible not to be putting wallets in your back pocket and sitting on it, you know, as much as possible.
It distorts
it distorts the shape of the hip and the back, and it causes pain, long-term pain. So as much as possible, do not sit on your wallet. It's very, very important.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Kelvin Owusu. We appreciate you very much. And how can people reach you?
Kelvin Owusu and MD on all social media platforms.
All right, fantastic. We've been speaking with Dr. Kelvin Owusu, and of course this segment was it's always sponsored by the Farmers Market. Farmers Market, 100% hygienic and farm fresh.